Welcome back to the IDP Plus Advice Show with our first show of the off season. We're going to begin by talking about post free agency impact for our individual defensive players, our IDPs. And with that, let's kick things off and get it started. All righty, here we go. And I am thrilled to be back with you all after a break, after the long regular season, hopefully successful season. Got a lot of positive feedback from you all. I really appreciate the great comments and questions on YouTube, and hopefully we'll have more of that as we progress. I am your host, Ricky Rodrigue. You can find me at RickyRod66. I love the NFL season. I love the NFL draft, and I also love the start of free agency. So over the next several shows, we're going to talk about IDP winners and losers. Wait, don't hang up. Don't hang up. Trust me on this, okay? Let me tell you why I like to do it this way. It's because the repeat rate at each of the positions on defense, offense as well, are much lower than you would expect. And by examining winners and losers, it gives us the opportunity to figure out who might jump in the top 12 or top 24 at each position, and just as importantly, who might fall out. So let me give you some good numbers here real quick that puts that in perspective, okay? Defensive tackles or interior defensive linemen, only about 5.5 out of 12 on average repeat in the top 12. Well, I didn't say that very well at all. 5.5 of 12 on average repeat top 12. 11 of the top 24, that's all that repeats. So less than half of the top 24 repeat at defensive tackle / interior defensive line. Defensive end edge, only about 4 of the top 12 repeat, or 11 of the top 24. At linebackers, on average, only about 4 of 12 and 11 of 24 repeat. Same stats as defensive end / edge. Cornerbacks are your lowest in terms of top 24 with only 3 out of the top 12 repeat for cornerbacks. That's the same for safeties as well. 3 out of the top 12 repeat. Cornerbacks, only 7.5 of the top 24 repeat. Safeties, only 9.5 of the top 24 repeat. So that's why looking at this from a winners and losers perspective is so darn valuable. We're going to do this over multiple shows, going through the various defensive positions, just so you know. And one of the important things I like to share with folks is that, too, we're not trying to draft last year's best team, to quote the famous Bob Harris of Football Diehards. We're trying to draft the best team for the coming year. And so once again, with those types of stats and examining the winners and losers, it can get us thinking along those lines. Now, what can impact and what often impacts people jumping in or people falling out of the top 24? Obviously, new defensive coordinators. Let's take example Indianapolis with Gus Bradley and his single high safety system. Impacts to the Indianapolis Colts defense. New defensive schemes. We have the Saints moving from a 4-3 to a 3-4. Yeah, they say they're going to be multiple, but yeah, 3-4 is where they're going to be with my beloved Saints. That has implications to players. If there's major changes on offense for the better, and with a goal of potentially even running the ball more and so forth, as we're going to see in Las Vegas and Seattle, that has implications to snap count, time of possession, and how much time the defenses are on the field. And of course, vice versa. If a offense has a new quarterback, a rookie quarterback who's not necessarily a stud, as we might see this year, they might have less time of possession, and their defense might be on the field more as a result. Yes, situations with new players being added to teams where you could have more rotations and changes in snap counts. Newer modified roles. I mean, the list goes on and on. So there, and let's not forget about injuries as well. We can't predict injuries, but I am a believer if someone has had a history of missing 3 or 4 games a year, they're probably going to continue to miss 3 or 4 games a year. So you'll hear a lot of that as we go through the different positions and we go through the players. Now, as we're approaching discussing this, it's going to be a combination of redraft and dynasty. So you're going to hear me, for example, talk about ages of a lot of these players as we go through it. And keep that in mind from a dynasty perspective in particular, though it might not have as much of an impact for redraft. And I know many scoring systems are different out there. So I had to try and take that into account as well. And what I try to do is focus on a combination of tackle heavy thinking as well as big play scoring as well for things like sacks and interceptions. Yes, I know it is March. Okay, it's March 19th as I record it. It'll be released shortly after this, but there will be other free agent signings. I know the NFL draft is coming, but this is a terrific grounding and starting point for everyone. And if you like what you're hearing and you feel good about it and all, you may want to move forward with some particular dynasty leagues with some potential trade offers, some of which are to get rid of some of these players and some of which trying to acquire them and taking that gamble. Now, we're going to jump in. We're going to start with interior defensive linemen, defensive tackles. But before we do, I just want to mention on IDP Plus, there is a 50% off sale on any subscription. 50%. That'll be the best sale you're going to see all year long. So take advantage of it. The promo code IDP 2025, IDP 2025. There's no plus in that promo code. IDP 2025 for 50% off. Take advantage, folks. All kind of rankings, all kind of great articles, the Discord channel, and of course, we have some really great tools that people are not taking advantage of at IDP Plus. Things like team fantasy points allowed by position, weekly fantasy finishes at each position by individual. So looking at Foye Aluakan, he finished first one week, 24th the next week, 13th the next week, 36th that next week. Get a feel for how consistent they are in their performances. So just one example of many great tools we have out there. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman. All righty. We're going to do winners and losers, as I mentioned. I'm going to kind of work backwards on this. So I'm going to start in terms of winners. I have 7 winners at this point for interior defensive lineman. Okay. At number 7, we're going to work from 7 towards number 1. Once again, these are Ricky's rankings. You might agree, you might disagree, but this is Ricky's thoughts, and hopefully they're thought-provoking for you at the end of the day. Number 7, Houston, Sheldon Rankins. Welcome back home to Houston, Texans, Mr. Rankins. He and, of course, Mario Edwards also re-signed there as well. When Sheldon was in Houston in 2023 season, so he left, went to Cincinnati, came back to Houston now. He had 6 sacks during the season with a combined 37 tackles on 59% of the snaps. So like to see a little bit more snaps, but some solid numbers there. That's why he's number 7. He's not number 1 necessarily, but someone who could jump into the top 24 for sure. Of course, he'll be flanked by Danielle Hunter from the great LSU Tigers, along with Will Anderson. Right as I was about to record this, I saw that Danielle Hunter got a nice $35 million one-year deal. So great for Danielle Hunter on that as a side note. Now, Rankins is 31, so keep that in mind from a dynasty perspective. But, he didn't exactly overexert himself last year. He had this, quote, mysterious illness where he only played 7 games with the Bengals last year. Something was up. So he should be a little bit more fresh this year, being he played so little last year. But Sheldon Rankins is number 7 on my list. Okay. I have a couple of duos coming up next, and my first duos are number 5 and number 6, and that's with the Green Bay Packers. Of course, they had a new defensive coordinator this past year, Jeff Hatley, or Hafley. I always forget how to pronounce it. Sorry, guys. Came over, was the Boston College head coach, came to be the defensive coordinator for the Packers. Big change there is that T.J. Slayton left in free agency. That creates more opportunities for Carl Brooks, who was a later round draft pick, but has been performing really well, and I have him at number 6 on the list. He's age 25. He went up this past year from 34% to 41% of the snaps, and he jumped up to 24 combined tackles and 3.5 sacks on that 41%. I could see that if they don't draft another defensive tackle, sign another defensive tackle, you could see both those percentages go up and the numbers to go along with it. You're going to hear me quoting some PFF pressure win rate stats throughout this. Okay. And so I want to give a shout out to PFF for these numbers. Carl Brooks finished at 51 out of 211. If I remember correctly, the number was 211 in terms of interior defensive lineman win pressure rate. So if you think about 32 teams, that puts him, and you quote unquote, maybe 2 defensive tackles per team that we're worried about. That puts him, 1.5 in, for lack of a better term. But he continued to improve. He was a little bit light coming in from college, put on some weight and so forth. Really like Carl Brooks. But there's one other person on Green Bay that I'm even more excited about. So I have I have Brooks maybe a little bit deeper. The other person I'm excited about is Devontae Wyatt, the former number 1 draft pick who's going to age 27 season. Wyatt was 7th, the number 7, single digit, out of 211 in terms of interior defensive line win pressure rate. He had 23 combined tackles and 5 sacks on only 41% of the snaps as well. The previous year, though, he had 36 combined tackles, 5.5 sacks on about 50% of the snaps. So his snap count came down even more. They had a little bit more of a rotation going. And folks like Brooks and I believe it's Kobe Wooten is his name, if I remember correctly, also got a little bit more playing time, along with TJ Slaton. So Slaton going should create more opportunities for both of those guys. We do want to watch if the Packers do draft a defensive tackle or a nose tackle in the draft. Typically, and depending on what round they're in, they might only get like 30, particularly like a nose tackle might only get like 32% of the snaps, so might not have as big an impact. We'll watch out for that. But like me some Carl Brooks at number 6, Devontae Wyatt at number 5. My next duo in the same division from the NFC North is with your Minnesota Vikings. So at number 4, I have Jonathan Allen going to his age 30 season. Jonathan Allen was 55th for interior defensive lineman win pressure rate. Now remember, he was playing hurt and then eventually had to be shut down with that torn rotator abductor, something along those lines. His snap count, though, went down significantly this past year. Of course, I kind of talked about it in the opening about how new defensive coordinators come in and change things. And both Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne saw a significant decrease in the snap count from what they had done in previous years in Ron Rivera, and there was more rotation. So he went from 79% to 59% in snap count, which, when you're not on the field, you're not going to have as many stats. I expect that to increase in Minnesota with the money that they are paying him. Look, in only 8 games, he had 3 sacks. Once again, he was a little bit banged up, and 19 combined tackles. So if you kind of double those stats, that would give you, assuming everything equal, that would give you 6 sacks and 38 combined tackles. Not too bad. Okay. The previous year, though, when he had 79% of the snaps, just to give you perspective, he had 53 combined tackles and 5.5 sacks. So, and before that, as a side note, he had the year before, he had 7.5 sacks and 65 combined tackles. You have the edge rushers, and this will apply to the next person I'm going to talk about as well. You have the edge rushers, meaning Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner, who, if you listen to my show quite a bit, you heard me talk about Dallas Turner being light in the pants, but hopefully he puts on some weight and he should get more playing time now with Patrick Jones going over to Carolina. With all of those guys, plus Harrison Phillips, who does a really good job of drawing that double team in the middle, and folks like Javon Hargrave, who is also signed, I like Jonathan Allen as a winner right now so far in post-free agency. The other one, as you probably figured out, at number 3 with Minnesota, Javon Hargrave. Now, Javon Hargrave is going to his age 32 season. He, as well, is coming off an injury, only played in 3 games this past year. In those 3 games, though, Hargrave was 14th for interior defensive line win pressure rate. Now, that is on a small sample, so that is a little bit dangerous. But historically, Hargrave has been great at getting after the passer. And I'm hoping with Brian Flores as the defense coordinator for both Allen, who we just talked about, as well as Hargrave, they'll be unleashed a little bit more as well. And with the help from the edges that we talked about, great opportunity. If you go back to 2023, Hargrave had 44 combined tackles and 7 sacks. Of course, like I mentioned, 2024, he missed a lot of time with the injuries. The year before that in Philadelphia, he had 60 combined tackles and 11 sacks. Now, okay, you're going to say, Ricky, okay, he was a couple of years younger back then. That is true. But he also had a lot of time off this past year. And with the recovering from the injury and so forth, and in the Flores scheme, feel really good about having Javon Hargrave at number 3. Moving to number 2 and number 1 as well, I have another pair of folks. Now, some people, this number 2, some people might disagree with where I have him. I think Keon White, who's my number 2, is going to move more to the interior this year and with Mike Vrabel's scheme. So I have him listed as the interior defensive lineman. And some sites had him there, some people had him on the edge. I think this coming year he'll be playing more in the interior. He was 58 of 211 in terms of edge pressure win rate. And that was on 74% of the snaps last year. So he did play a great number of snaps this past year. And with that, he had 5 sacks and 56 combined tackles. I think this gentleman, Keon White, is just scratching the surface. And with Vrabel coming in, a much more experienced defensive staff coming in, with some of the things that they've surrounded him with a Harold Landry, for example, with a Spillane, with adding Carlton Davis in the secondary, with a Milton Williams. All these things are going to help out Keon White way more than he had. And also, if Christian Barmore can come back from the blood clot situation that he has, even better for Mr. Keon White. So he is my number 2. For those that have been following me for a while, and those that haven't, I'm a big New Orleans Saints and LSU Tiger fan. I'm from South Louisiana originally. And all I can say is I remember when the Saints drafted Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame over Keon White out of Georgia Tech. And I remember just throwing something. I'll just leave it at that. And maybe 4-letter word or 2 came out of my mouth. And so far, I was right in my reaction. I'll just leave it at that. And our number 1, once again, tied to a duo. So we had 3 duos in this top 7. That's Milton Williams, the signee by New England, coming over from the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, where he had a fantastic Super Bowl performance. Milton Williams tied for 7th, along with Devontae Wyatt, in interior defensive line win pressure rate. So very, very talented is Milton Williams there. Last year, he had 5 sacks and 24 combined tackles, which isn't much, but he only played 48% of the snaps. Okay. The year before, he only had half a sack, but he had 42 combined tackles. That was on 46% of the snaps. With the money they're paying him, I expect his snap count to go up into the 65 to 75% range on a regular basis, probably in the low 70s is my guess. And with that, will give him the opportunities to build on those numbers. And with the surrounding cast, with the better coaching system in New England than what they had in the past, Milton Williams becomes my number 1 IDP post-free agency winner for interior defensive linemen / defensive tackles. All right, so we only had 7 defensive tackles. I do want to remind you of a couple of things before we move to the edge spot. One is that most of the defensive tackles of any value did sign with a team. Okay, there's not much out there. Okay, Foley Fatukasi will sign with someone. He's not a superstar. He will play some at some point, but he's not going to give you fantasy value. The only one that's still out there that may give some fantasy value is Calais Campbell. So he's one to keep an eye out on. It is also a deep deep rookie class at the defensive tackles side of things. So once again, this is post-free agency, pre-draft. Yes, things can change as I talked about earlier, but based on where we are now, there's your top 7 to focus on. I almost forgot. I did the winners. Before we go to Edge, we got to do the losers, right? At number 5, Darius Robinson, going into his second year with the Arizona Cardinals. Look, he basically missed all of training camp yet last year, missed most of the season with injuries. Cardinals signed Dalvin Tomlinson. They brought back, well, they have coming back from injury, Justin Jones along with Bilo Nichols. They also brought back L.J. Collier. Dante Stills returns. Gannon did a lot of rotation. Jonathan Gannon, the head coach, defensive coordinator for Cardinals, did a lot of rotation of his front. I expect that to continue, which means I just don't see Robinson getting the share of snaps that he needs to be successful. So Darius Robinson, number 5 on my losers post-free agency at this point in time. Number 4 in that list, I alluded to it earlier when I talked about Jonathan Allen, and that is Daron Payne for the Washington Commanders. Now going to his age 28 season. It was a long time ago. In fact, it was 2022 when he had 11 and a half sacks and a career high 64 tackles on 87% of the snaps. That's not happening anymore, folks. This past year, he had 42 combined tackles, 4 sacks on 69% of the snaps. He also was 81st of 211 on interior defensive line win pressure rate. Now, and that was, oh, shoots, I didn't write it down in my notes. Oh, I did. Last year, he only played 69% of the snaps, so way down. I expect it to be even less going forward as well. Granted, they released Jonathan Allen, but the high second-round pick from last year, Jerzon Johnny Newton out of Illinois, had a pretty productive first season, and they're expecting a lot more from him. But then they signed Javon Kinlaw from the 49ers, 3 years, $45 million. I still can't get over that. That feels like overpay. They brought in big nose tackle Eddie Goldman from the Atlanta Falcons. They re-signed Sheldon Day. They re-signed Jalen Holmes. I just don't see realistically where Daron Payne could be successful. He is number 4 on my loser list for defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman. Number 3, Byron Murphy II. Another second-year player similar to Darius Robinson. Very young, but at the same time, it sure said something that Seattle went out and paid a whole bunch of money to DeMarcus Lawrence to join Leonard Williams and Jaron Reed up front in that 3-man front for Seattle. What does that mean? It means Murphy's not even probably starting with those gentlemen. Will he rotate in? Absolutely, but he probably won't be starting. Look, he played about 49% of the snaps this past year, only 36 combined tackles. More troubling, only half a sack, because one of his calling cards, because he was a little bit smaller, when he came on the draft, was supposed to be his quick penetration and things along those lines. Only half a sack, a little bit discouraging. Now, granted, he is a rookie, needs time to develop, maybe bulk up a little bit, but not good. He was 41st out of 211 on win pressure rate, but he didn't really obviously translate that into sacks. Byron Murphy II, out of the University of Texas, going into his second year with Seattle, number 3 on my loser list there. Number 2, this one pains me, from the New Orleans Saints, Brian Bresee. Okay, Brian Bresee going into his 3rd year, but the Saints are moving to that 3-4 with Brandon Staley coming in as the defensive coordinator. Yes, he had 7.5 sacks, but only 25 combined tackles on 60% of the snaps. That sack number feels like an outlier, and that tackle number is ridiculously low. Now, one of the things that, to Kellen Moore's credit, he actually brought in Bo Davis, the defensive line coach at LSU, who has been coaching in college for many years, who's known as a great teacher, something the Saints defensive line coach Dennis Allen was criticized and fired for. We don't have to mention his name. I won't, at least. And so maybe some good coaching will help out Brissy to be more successful. But even with that, I expect him to move to one of the 3-4 end positions, and that will, in most leagues, will still be considered as a 3-4 person, an interior defensive lineman. And I just don't see that tackle number coming up, and I see the sack number going down. Brian Brissy. Oh, and as a side note, he was 124th of 211 on win pressure rate. So Brissy is loser number 2. Loser number 1 at this point in time, Zach Sealer of the Miami Dolphins. Zach is going to his age 30 season. Just about every defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman on the Miami Dolphins is gone. Benito Jones hasn't been signed by anybody. Calais Campbell hasn't been signed by anybody, as alluded to a little bit earlier. Deshaun Hand did sign with someone else, and there are some other guys that haven't been signed. But anyway, Zeeler's on the island right now, and turning age 30 now, we have that concern, and we don't know who's going to be side by side with him to help him out. He did finish 62nd of 211 on the win pressure rate. Once again, thank you PFFs. Shout out to them. And he did have 10 sacks for a second straight year. His combined tackles, though, over the last 3 years, it was at 70, went down to 63 2 years ago, and came down to 55 this past year, trending in the wrong direction. Zach Sealer for now is my number 1 loser for defensive tackle / interior defensive lineman post free agency. So there you have it. So before we move into defensive end / edge, just one more reminder about that IDP Plus 50% off sale on any IDP Plus subscription. Use the promo code IDP 2025. Take advantage of all the great articles, rankings, tools, etc. Okay, with that now, we're going to move to defensive line / edge. And I have 10 in this bucket, and with maybe a little bit cheating in there, as you'll hear. But so let's start at numbers 9 and number 10. And number 9 and number 10, the Seattle Seahawks come into play. And this is once again winners for defensive end / edge. And those two winners are Uchenna Nwosu and Boy Mafe. Now, their edge pressure win rate is nothing to shout about. Nwosu was 156 and Mafe was 88th. Both of them were playing injured, have had a lot of injuries, but we're starting to recover as the year progressed, and we're getting more and more playing time as the year went on. So if you go back to the depth chart, Draymond Jones left as a free agent. We may talk about him a little bit later as a side note. So that leaves just Derek Hall now competing with them for snaps as well. So I expect their snap count to go up. I expect them to be healthier. And with that combination interior defensive line that we talked about of Leonard Williams, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Jaron Reed, and I sure hope I was calling it DeMarcus Lawrence and not Dexter Lawrence earlier. My apologies if I screw that up. In my head, I think I may have done that. Okay. Anyway, but I like Nwosu and Mafe from the edge as number 9 and number 10 on my winners here so far in post free agency because Seattle hasn't signed anybody else. Speaking of cheating, Philadelphia, I have 2 folks coming in at, I'm calling it 8A and 8B, and that's Jalix Hunt and Azeez Ojulari. Jalix Hunt is age 24, going into his second year, finished 153rd. Azeez Ojulari finished 116th in terms of win pressure rate for edge / defensive ends. But the thing about Ojulari that I like, who they just signed, is he had 22 sacks in 46 games. And so if you're, as I mentioned in the opening, I tried to keep in mind high scores for big plays, of which sacks fall into that big play category. If you look at what's happened on the edge for the Philadelphia Eagles, they lost Josh Sweat to Arizona, whose name you might hear coming up a little bit later. Brandon Graham has retired. They signed Josh Uche. Okay, and I'm going to go into Josh Uche tangent for a second. Yes, way back in 2022, he did have 11 and a half sacks. Okay, he's never had more than 3 in a season besides that 1 year. And of those 11.5, 8 came within 3 games within a small 4 or 5 week period. 3 against Indy, 3 against Arizona, 2 against Buffalo between weeks 9 and 14 back in 22. So he's had about 4 good weeks in his whole career. So not worried about Josh Uche. Bryce Huff wasn't even active for the Super Bowl. He was inactive, the big free agent signing from last offseason. Vic Fangio just doesn't love him because he won't even try against the run, apparently, or he's too small and just got run over. So not worried about him. Nolan Smith got hurt during the Super Bowl. That doesn't leave many folks. Now, Nolan Smith may still be ready for the beginning of the year, but I expect Jalen Hunt and Azeez Ojulari to get much more playing time, particularly in your sack-heavy leagues, from a point scoring system, like both of these gentlemen. And by the way, I love the way Jalen Hunt, when he did have playing time, he ran all over the field. I expect him to have a very nice tackle number as well. Very nice combined tackle number for Jalen Hunt. Okay. Moving to number 7 in our winners for the edge, Malcolm Koonce, still only 26 years old. Unfortunately, as most of our listeners here know, he was lost for the whole season with a preseason injury last year. The previous year in 2023 may have been forgotten. He had 8 sacks and 43 combined tackles. It was a breakout year. Granted, he'll be coming off an injury, but at least he had the full season to recover, plus obviously the full off season. Christian Wilkins will be back from injury as well to help in the middle. Max Crosby, who was really hampered by that ankle injury, will be back and healthy and has a big new fat contract. And of course, Adam Butler, the kind of journeyman who's around 30, 31 years old, had kind of a breakout year for himself. And he is also back with them as well. So a lot of other people to draw attention from away from Koonce. Like Koonce, he is my number 7 on the list. Number 6, and in hindsight, I probably would flip Koonce this person, but it's Dayo Odeyingbo, formerly of the Colts, who signed with the Chicago Bears. Age 26, finished ranked 61st in terms of edge pressure win rate. In the last 3 years, working from most recent to oldest, 3 sacks, 8 sacks, 5 sacks. I do like that 8 sacks from a couple of years ago. The number I don't like that he had this past year, and probably why I should flip him and Koonce, is that he only had 31 combined tackles last year. He's never had more than 38, which was back in 2023. So that's a little bit of a worry and risk, particularly if you need, depending on what's in your scoring systems, and you need tackles to support also the sack numbers as well. He will be across from Montez Sweat. They did sign Grady Jarrett. Grady Jarrett's a little bit older. Gervin Dexter was starting to break out. Someone, as a side note, not necessarily a winner because of free agency, but a player that I like. He will be in that mix in the interior defensive line as well. That could do some freeing up for Dayo Odeyingbo. And most importantly, though, I think his snap count will go up as well. With that 4-man rotation they had with the Colts last year, I do expect that Odeyingbo will get more snaps with what they paid him and starting opposite of Montez Sweat. Key for him, some of those pressures, he's got to turn them into sacks as he did a couple of years ago. Number 5, and this one might surprise some folks, but it's Chauncey Golston, who signed with the New York Giants. He's age 27. This past year, he had the most snaps he's ever played and the most sacks that he's ever had. And he's also had the most combined tackles that he had. So let's talk about that. He had 5.5 sacks last year. His previous career high was 1.5. He had 56 combined tackles this past year. His previous high was 32. That was all the way back in his rookie year. Okay, that was year 1. This past year was year 4 for him. He did that on playing 72% of the snaps. His previous high was 41%. Now, he's another one of those. Is he at edge? Is he an interior defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman? The way the Giants will probably use him, and thus I expect him to be notated from a position eligibility perspective is defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman, because they've got Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns on the edge, and they're going to have big Dexter Lawrence, big sexy Dexy, right next to him as well. So I loved when I'd watch the Cowboys play this past year, the way he too was running all over the field, showed up in the combined tackles. Chauncey Golston, number 5 in my winners here during free agency. Number 4, Chase Young of the New Orleans Saints. No, this isn't a Ricky Saints bias. Okay. Um, Chase is still only 26 years old. His rookie year, he was basically turned 21 during his rookie year. He played 63% of the snaps and he finished 49th in edge pressure win rate. Because I did watch my Saints quite a bit this past year, he came oh so close to so many sacks, and did have a decent amount of pressures and quarterback hits that just didn't turn into sacks. With the coaching from Bo Davis that I talked about earlier, I like the probability of him increasing those sacks. I like him being on the edge in the 3-4, where he struggled a little bit more was on run defense in the 4-3. So I could see him playing a little bit more on the edge from a snap count perspective as well. So the one thing I worry about though is his combined tackles. So while he did have 5.5 sacks, he only had 31 combined tackles. Now, is he capable of more combined tackles? Yes. Back in his rookie year, in 2020, he had 44 combined tackles, 7.5 sacks. He's got the capability. He's been off of that injury for long enough. He's healthy going into the offseason. I do like Chase Young a lot going into this next year. He is number 4 on my winners list for defensive end and edge. Number 3, and I told you this name would come up a little bit later, Draymond Jones, who signed with the Tennessee Titans. He's only 28 years old, finished 56th in win pressure rate, okay, which is fantastic. He's going to fill the Harold Landry role, who the Titans released and who went and signed over in New England. He should get a much higher snap count than he had in Seattle with that 4-man rotation he had with Derek Hall and Nwosu and Mafe. And there was a fifth one that I'm drawing a blank that was also involved if one of those folks were hurt. So there was a lot of rotation. He moves into the Harold Landry role, same defensive system that Landry was in. I can see him getting up close to his previous career high of 6.5 sacks, probably a little bit more than that. And when he had that back in 2022, he played 81% of the snaps. He also had 47 combined tackles. So there's a lot to like here versus what we saw last year when he had 55% of the snaps played, only 28 combined tackles, 4 sacks. I don't think Seattle used him right for what his skill set was when he was first signed. And I just think Tennessee will use him right as they went and sign him in free agency. He is number 3 on my list. Number 2, out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Yaya Diaby. So you're going to say, Ricky, I don't get it. Well, he finished 18th in win pressure rates. So a fantastic number there. He only had 4.5 sacks last year, so he was under expectations for sacks. Previous year, he had 7.5, which based on a much lower snap count, he was a little bit over expectations for that particular year. His combined tackles, though, from his rookie year, where he had 38, jumped all the way to 54. I love to see that out of an edge player. So he's got sack upside. He runs all over the place trying to make tackles or assistant tackles. He's got another year of experience. And he has Hassan Reddick playing opposite him now as opposed to Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. And no, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is not in my winners, even though he signed in Cleveland. Can't do it. He's just not there. Of course, he should have an improving Kalijah Kancey to helping out in the middle, along with Big Vita Vea. Year 3, from an experience perspective, I really like the opportunity for Yaya Diaby. Chris Braswell is a loser. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But Yaya Diaby, number 2 on my winners list. And a lot of it is because of the signing of Hassan Reddick as well. Number 1, Arizona, Josh Sweat, signed from the Philadelphia Eagles, the world champions. Incredible season, incredible Super Bowl. He ranked 29 in edge pressure win rate. His snap count should go up from the 63% last year when he had 8 sacks and 41 combined tackles. Of course, he is playing for his former defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, who is now, of course, the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals and also their defensive coordinator. Gannon knows what he's getting in him because he used to coach him. Gannon knows how to use him. Gannon can look at how Fangio used him as well. Just love this opportunity. Now, there's no Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in the middle, so that does create a little bit of a risk. But I love Josh Sweat's capabilities, love the skill set, love the opportunity in Arizona. He is my number 1 winner among defensive end / edge post free agency. All righty, let's go to the losers. But before we do, I just want to mention that there are a couple of free agents that haven't signed of note. Now, we've got some age with these folks, like Cedarius Smith and Matt Judon, and Charles Omenihu, who played with the Chiefs last year, but he was coming off an injury last year, so we didn't get to really see him, when he joined late in the year coming back from that injury. So when he joined the Chiefs, it wasn't just the typical Charles Omenihu. So anyway, watch for where those 3 guys sign. Could have some implications to some of the folks we just talked about, as well as the rookie class for defense end / edge is also very loaded, just like defensive tackles are. So as a result of that, just watch out for the ones we just talked about, because some of those winners may have a little bit of a pullback, but I do like the ones we talked about so far. Okay, let's go to the losers real quick on the defensive end / edge. We'll work our way backwards. I have 9 of these. The first one, I just alluded to him, Chris Braswell, Joe Tryon, Sean Kalias. Braswell, 3rd round draft pick last year. I wasn't that high on him, but looked like at first he might have an opportunity to take Joe Tryon Shoyinka's place, but they signed Hassan Reddick to that 1-year, $14 million deal, and Braswell doesn't have line of sight to getting on the field as a starter. So he is number 9 on my loser list. Bryce Huff, I talked about him a little bit earlier. Fangio hates him. Can't stop the run. They signed Ojulari. They have Jalix Hunt growing. I just don't see the opportunities for Bryce Huff. He is number 8 on my edge loser list. Zaven Collins at number 7. They signed Josh Sweat. They re-signed Baron Browning. They have B.J. Ojulari, the former Georgia Bulldog, coming back from IR. So with all of that happening, Zaven Collins, I just don't see the opportunity for him. And if you haven't gotten rid of him previously, it's probably too late. He's number 7 on the list. Number 6, talked about him already a couple of different times, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. He's a loser, even though he's going to be opposite of Myles Garrett. Just don't see it. Don't get on that bandwagon. Stay away from it. Number 5, Patrick Jones, who signed with the Carolina Panthers. So he was a very inefficient pass rusher in Minnesota, though he was used quite a bit by Flores and previous to Brian Flores. But he will be in rotation with Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Wanham. Don't like these rotation, particularly these edge players, and I think he'll have 3 or 4 great games, but it's kind of like the Deshaun Jacksons of the offense. You just don't know when those big games are going to happen. And so with that, Patrick Jones, number 5 on my edge loser list, with him signing with Carolina. Number 4, the Indianapolis 4 defensive end / edge players. Yes, Deo Odeyingbo left, but Samson Ebukam is back. So we're going to see more of this rotation with Ebukam, Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis, and Laiatu Latu, and I hope I said that name correctly. Latu like him a lot, but I just don't think he's going to get the snap count that we need to be successful. And to be able to play him on a regular basis, unless there's other injuries, or unless they end up cutting Ebicom because they need cap space or something along those lines. So the 4 edge players for the Colts, they make my loser list at number 4. Number 3, um, the edge players for the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Phillips will be coming back from an Achilles injury, and boy, I do love Jalen Phillips, but I do hate anybody coming back from an Achilles injury their first year back. And even in their second year back, I don't expect the peak capabilities of what they would have done pre-injury. Then you have Bradley Chubb coming back from injury, who missed the entire year, who maybe could have came back late in the year, but they decided it wasn't worth it. He kind of took a pay cut to stay, but then he has incentives built in. And then you have Chop Robinson as well, who started playing like Tarzan and started Jane. For those that watched my IDP Plus advice show during the season, you know what I'm talking about. And started getting about a sack a week, not much more. One tackle a week, and it was a sack, but he was getting those. But with that rotation, with potentially a step up from Muhammad Kamara, they've offered a contract to Emmanuel Ogbah to come back. I just see this nasty rotation with a couple of guys come back from injury and them not at peak. Number 3 on my losers list for defense end / edge is the Miami Dolphins edge group. Number 2, Joey Bosa going to the Buffalo Bills. Greg Russo just signed his big fat contract. Expect him to be playing about 75% of the snaps on one side. Leaves AJ Epinesa along with Joey Bosa rotating on the other side. Plus probably throwing Javon Solomon, plus probably throwing another draft pick as well. So Bosa's days of getting 75% of the snaps when he was healthy, okay, I got to throw that in there because Joey Bosa wasn't exactly the picture of health and missed a whole lot of games these past couple of years. But, if I remember correctly, and I forgot to put it in my notes, my apologies, he's either 29 going on 30 or turned 30 already. He's somewhere in that age bucket. Joey Bosa, time to let him go, folks. And the excitement around the Buffalo Bills, maybe you can sell him if you haven't sold him yet. And number 1, and this kind of has a duo sort of, but it's Joey Bosa's brother, Nick, at this point in time. I love Nick Bosa, the player. I love the fact that he plays 85, 87% of the snaps every week. I love that his get off is in the top 2 from an edge perspective in terms of speed to go. It's amazing how fast it is, by the way. But there's nobody there to help him out. Many defensive tackles gone. Don't get too excited about Jordan Elliott there, defensive tackle, really commanding double teams. They let Leonard Floyd go. It's not like Drake Jackson is going to come back from IR and, the former second round pick and, be that effective. Yetur Gross-Matos. So what I'm worried about for Bosa right now, and once again, this could change depending on what the 49ers do in the draft or the rest of free agency. I'm worried that there's just nobody that other teams are going to be forced to pay attention to, and they can put a lot of attention on Bosa, and that could mean a pullback on his sacks. Now, the way he does hustle, I don't expect his combined tackles to come down quite as much, but I do see a drop and potentially a big one in his sacks at this point in time. Does that mean I'm not going to touch him at all? Nick Bosa, that is, in a draft? I won't say that, but right now he wouldn't be in my top 4 or 5 edge players at this particular moment. He's probably going to fall back to about 7 or 8 at this point in time. Okay? So we're about 50 minutes in right now, so we're going to call it a stop here. And what we'll do for the next show is we will get into linebackers and defensive backs, and we'll do winners and losers in both of those categories and maybe unsigned free agents as well for both of those categories. In addition, if you leave your questions here on YouTube, and if there's some good ones, you might just get a shout out and we might just put your question and talk about that answer right here in this show when we do the next one. Okay? If you like this, give a thumbs up on YouTube. I'd really appreciate that. And give me a follow at RickyRod66. I know when you're watching this and listening to that, you're going to say, boy, Ricky wasn't smooth on his first one compared to his other shows. I got to admit, I should have practiced a little bit more going into this one. So apologize for some of the roughness that you guys went through. Don't forget about that IDP Plus special for the website, idpplus.com. 50% off right now with IDP 2025 as a promo code. Don't know how long that'll last for the great articles, for all the great rankings, offense and IDP, rookie, dynasty. I mean, you name it, they got it. And then, of course, many, many great tools that encourage you all to take advantage of. Okay, so this is, by the way, as a side note, I retired from work, so you may see and hear more from me as we move forward, okay? So this is the now retired Ricky Rodrigue at Ricky Rodrigue 66 or at Ricky Rod 66, wishing you, your family, your friends great health and happiness. Be kind to one another. Be kind to one another, everybody. I'm out of here and catch you next time.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.